Let's go.
Let's go. Oh,
Do you want to?
sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Let's say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues.
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where we talk about easy movies that are nice and calm and joyful and happy and wonderful. I'm Lauren Humphreys Brooks, and with me, as always, is Karen Peterson. Hello, Karen.
Hello, I'm ready to talk about a very uncomplicated little movie today.
Oh God, it's just, well, you know, we've been doing David Lynch films the entire month. And it's just like, this is nice and calm, and we totally know what's going on the entire time. It'll be fun to like get back to some narrative, linear narratives. That will be interesting when we get back to that.
I don't even know what to do with myself when we do.
I know, it'll just be like, where are the like red curtains and the blue roses? Like something weird has to happen, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So before we get going, how are you, Karen?
Okay, how are you?
I am pretty good. I am looking forward to going to see Reese Darby tonight.
I am so excited for you.
I am very excited for me too. I'm excited to not be able to like. I won't remember anything that he actually says. I'm calling it right now.
Are you gonna meet him after?
No. It's just a comedy show.
Well, they tend to greet the audience after.
They sometimes do. I know that he does sometimes and sometimes not. So it's kind of. But also, like, I think I would actually melt into a puddle. I don't think that I would be able to be coherent, and I would just probably flush bright red and run out of the room. Aww. So I'm telling you, like, I do not. There are some people that I cannot deal with being in the same space as. But I will let you know how it goes.
You know, it's funny because I've been privileged enough to meet a lot of celebrities over the years, and just to your point about like sometimes you melt into a puddle, the thing is that it's really unpredictable for me when that's going to happen. I've met some famous people and I've been totally cool, and then I met Ian Ziering from Beverly Hills 90210 and I couldn't talk. Like, what is happening? This is stupid.
It's specific people. That's the thing. Like, you know, I've been in spaces with like Isabelle Huppert and Almodovar, people that I like and admire and everything. Just like, okay, they're normal, they're people, they're normal people. But I once actually met a band that I was a big fan of. They're not even a famous band, particularly, when I was a teenager, and I just like could not say anything. I was just like, here, sign this, and that was it. Like, that was all I was capable of. And I'm like, your music is my everything. It was just like, no, it's just nothing.
Yeah, when I met Ian Ziering, all that came out of my mouth was, "I've loved you since high school."
See, that's the thing. I would just be worried, just like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. Like, anyways.
Of course, this was years ago, and if I met him now, it would be different. But you'd just be totally. That stands out. I mean, that same day I met William Shatner, and it was just like, whatever, you're William Shatner. And who else did I meet that day? Ernest Borgnine, Ed Asner. No, not Ernest Borgnine, but Ed Asner was there. And it's like these amazing people, and I got starstruck over Ian Ziering.
It's just like, it's who means something to us, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyways, you know what? I would have been starstruck if I ever met David Lynch, but I think he would have been very chill and very like interesting and strange. Yeah, like he seems.
Hopefully,
like
he would have had earphones in and yelling at us the whole time.
So let's get into it. So today we're going to talk about the film Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which is a prequel film made in 1992, after the original Twin Peaks series had been canceled. And this film deals with kind of the what happened before the death of Laura Palmer. So it's some backstory and then the 7 days leading up to Laura Palmer's murder. But before we get into that, this film has a lot of very bizarre history. But before we get into that, Karen, you've been rewatching some of the Twin Peaks series. So like talk to us about that.
Well, before I even talk about the series itself, I just want to talk a little bit about the background because I was in high school. Well, specifically, I was in junior high. I was in 8th grade when it started in that spring in 1990. But I remember I didn't watch the first couple of episodes when they were initially on. I watched it in the summer. I caught up on summer reruns because that used to be a thing. And then by that fall, when I started my freshman year, all my friends, like everybody at school, was talking about the show. And so everybody was watching it. It's funny because now I go back and look and realize it wasn't a huge hit. And that's actually why it was canceled after the second season. But it was actually canceled before that, but it got to come back to finish the second season. But because all my friends watched it, I thought everybody was watching it. I thought everybody loved this show. And so when it was canceled, we were all pretty devastated by that, pretty just like, what do you mean it's just gone, you know? And it was interesting. And you and I, just before we started recording, we're talking about how crazy it is that this show was not just on television, but it was on ABC. But I've been thinking a lot about that this last couple of days, and it actually kind of makes sense that this ended up on network television in the early 90s because, I mean, especially given that it didn't last, but the fact that it got greenlit and went to series isn't that surprising when you consider this is a time where quirky small town mysteries were kind of popular and they were popping up. So around the same time, you have Northern Exposure, which was set in Alaska. And you have, what else was there? Picket Fences, which was set in Wisconsin. And then X-Files comes along 2 years later, and that's that entire show is about going to quirky small towns. So there's it was just kind of it fits into the time period. It also is just a little, I think, too weird for people. Nobody was really ready for it, and that's why it didn't ultimately last. But it's one of those that it's playing on a lot of those tropes, and visually, if you look at it, it's very, I've seen like Northern Exposure, it's very similar to Northern Exposure, like it's that early 90s look, right? And it, but it's Lynchian, so you have that early 90s look and these kind of quirky small town characters, and there is a lot of humor in Twin Peaks as well, despite its subject matter. But then it's Lynchian because it's like, but everything seems a little off and wrong and bad, right? And so it is like it really is this precursor, this kind of beginning of this different kind of prestige television, and is really very far ahead of its time in that sense. So it's almost like it slipped in. Like people are like, oh, this makes sense. Like a small, and what the setup is like, okay, so the homecoming queen is murdered, and you have this entire town full of suspects, and it's this pristine little, mountain town basically. And there are all sorts of other like small town drama things going on. So on the surface, it looks very straightforward. And then, of course, it's not even remotely because it's David Lynch, and things get progressively weirder. And certainly by the end of season 1, where we do solve the central mystery of who killed Laura Palmer, by the end of season 1, and I even remember watching this, I did not see it when it first came out. I was a actual child. But I remember, so I saw it many, many years later. But even for me at the end of season 1, I'm just like, okay, all right. So like we know who killed Laura Palmer. There's a whole other season left. What else can possibly happen?
And this was not my first exposure to David Lynch, but definitely a time where I was like, what the fuck? Like it just goes off on into like this exponential level of weirdness that if you're not prepared for it or you don't know what's coming, it is this sensation of like, what the hell is happening and why is it happening? And either you're into it or you're not, basically. Either you buy into the whole system that he's setting up, or you're like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm done. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Well, just to clarify, though, they didn't really solve the mystery of who killed Lauren Palmer until the halfway through the second season. The first season, it seems pretty clear, but then there's a big sharp turn in season 2, and after that happened, I think that's kind of where audiences were losing interest, because once they solved that, then it was like, to your point, where else is there left to go? But also it just was so weird. And then I think ABC showed a lack of confidence in the show, because then it starts moving time slots. It's getting bumped all around. It's hard to find, which is a kiss of it. At least it used to be. I mean, I don't think they really do this anymore. They just outright cancel stuff. But back in the day, if they started fiddling with the time slot, it was a kiss of death. Like, that show was not coming back. And that's essentially what happened with Twin Peaks. But yeah, it was interesting. It's funny because I remember there was an AMC show years ago called I think it's called The Killing. And it's police detectives in Seattle, or like up near Seattle. Very like not Twin Peaks Lynchian, but similar kind of vibes. And I remember they didn't solve that murder at the end of the first season, and people were so mad. And I was like, did any of you people watch Twin Peaks?
Well, and it's just it goes into all of these weird supernatural elements that and this is where a lot of the debate comes in, like how much of this is, and it's Lynchian, how much of it is psychological, like a projection of the mind, as it were, how much of it is like, quote, real. And of course, as we've talked about in these last few episodes, Lynch blurs the boundaries between reality and surreality, basically. So there isn't a defined point of like the dream world or the supernatural world and the world that the characters are existing in. It overlaps. So one of the things I think we want to talk about is this issue of Bob, and what Bob is, who Bob is, what the Black Lodge is, what the White Lodge is, those things. And the open question, especially with those figures, is who are these people? Like, and can we solve it? Are they demons? Are they projections? Are they, visual representations of psychological breaks? Like, there are all kinds of ways you can read it. But the problem is, as with most Lynch stuff, you can't completely overlay this like solid boundary onto it. And say like, this is what it is.
Yeah. So a little bit of just kind of catching up for folks who may not remember or may have not seen it and are just listening to this to find out if they should. Some of the background, you have Laura Palmer in the show. Laura Palmer, it starts off with her being murdered. And she has been murdered. And it's, she's the homecoming queen, but and you look at her picture and she just looks like the pure all-American girl. And then you start to learn very quickly she has 2 boyfriends, but she's also doing some other things too. She uses drugs. She's not just this like sweet, perfect, innocent girl. There's this whole darker story to her, but also that permeates the entire town. And Kyle MacLachlan is Agent Dale Cooper, who comes in to investigate the murder. And over time, you get to know some of these very quirky people that live in Twin Peaks, Washington. And by the second season, it's revealed that Laura was killed by her father, who is played by Ray Wise. He's phenomenal in the show, I think. And but even then, that's not just a straightforward answer. And he also, this happens, he's been abusing her, but is it him? Is there something else going on? What's the real answer? And it takes a very long time before we start to even know what questions to ask to even learn some of that. So
Yeah. Well, and there's all of the there are all of these other subplots that then feed into it, including Cooper's visions of I think, is it the Black Lodge or the White Lodge? The dream visions, and
the man who talks backwards.
Yeah, the man who talks backwards, the log lady, and then all of these almost Peyton Place subplots that are going on. People are having affairs. People, you've got an abusive husband. You have the FBI kind of entering into all of this. You have the local sheriff and his little group of deputies. So you have all of these other things that are going on that are very recognizable, and some of them are quite funny and quirky and weird. But there's always this there's this permeation of darkness running through all of it, that something strange is going on and it's not good, right?
Yeah.
And so the Fire Walk with Me is then the prequel to all of this. And so this is one of those times where I'm like, do you have to have seen Twin Peaks to really experience Fire Walk with Me? And in some ways, I think you do, but it was interesting for me rewatching this film. I've not seen the series in quite a long time. So rewatching this film, I knew the basic points, I knew who all of the characters were, etc. But there was a lot of stuff that I just didn't remember or didn't recall. And there are a lot of characters who don't appear at all in Fire Walk with Me, because most of the film is very, very much focused on Laura Palmer and the lead up to her death, but also who she is. And one of the things I think is great about this film is that in the series, she is very much this figure who all of these different people talk about and have memories of, and we learn more and more about her, but we're learning about her through this filter of this town and all of these different permutations of who she was.
Yeah. And
Fire Walk with Me very much centralizes her and her experience, very subjectively.
Right. Yeah.
And to have that for a female victim is unusual, but it's really good to actually get to see that, to get to see her experience, especially in this is a rough story. This is one of, I think, probably Lynch's darkest films. And it goes into being a victim of sexual abuse, being a victim of incest, and also the complexities that come out of that, because Laura is she's not solely a victim. She is a complex human being, and Lynch allows her to be complex. She is not the perfect victim. He doesn't make her into this perfect victim, but allows her to be all kinds of things, and to be all kinds of things to herself. So it's not just about the people that she relates to. In fact, they're almost unimportant. It's about her and her experience. And that's something that I really like about this film, as tough as it is.
Yeah, I think that is all part of why it struggled when it was released and people didn't really know what to do with it. And the initial reaction was not great. The world was a different place in 1992, and being willing to accept a homecoming queen with a dark other side to her was just kind of, no, that's just not, that's not how the world works. So those kinds of things, and really seeing it through her eyes, seeing her, as you say, as this imperfect victim, but as she's so complex and so fully realized as a person, because we're all complex, and, she's full of contradictions. She's beautiful and sweet, but she's also not, and I think that was just really hard for people to accept. But it's also one of the reasons I think it has been easy to reappraise this film years later, and why so many people have. And if you compare reactions in 1992 to reactions in, say, 2022, they're very, very different, because we as a world have changed in how we understand women, how we understand victims of abuse, how we understand just the complexity of all humans. And I think that that's something Lynch tapped into very early and very often.
Yeah, I agree. And also you think about it, so this film comes out not like it got greenlit not long after the series was actually canceled. And of course the expectation had been okay, he's gonna continue the story, right? We're gonna find out what happens to Cooper. Because we finish on a major cliffhanger with Cooper, especially, even though we've solved the central mystery. And what he does instead is go back. He goes back, just like, we're going to look at Laura Palmer. We're going to look at the victim, actually. We're not going to look at Special Agent Dale Cooper. We're going to look at the person who was murdered. We're going to look at the backstory to everything that leads up to Cooper's arrival in Twin Peaks. And we're going to focus on, like, so I guess that there were a number of scenes that were shot, but that were eventually cut because Lynch felt they were taking away from the main story. That involved some of like the sheriff and the quirkier characters, right? The ones that were like, oh, we like seeing what's going on with them. What's their story, right? And instead, he's like laser focusing really on this pattern of abuse, and particularly on the character of Laura Palmer. So if you're going in thinking like, oh, we're going to get this sort of dark but humorous and like interesting things going on in Twin Peaks, like, no, we're not. We're going to talk about incest.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you're approaching this as a viewer of Twin Peaks, you know the story, you know where this is going, basically. You know what happens, you know the ending for Lara, and you know what has been happening to her. And you know how she's been victimized by her father. And so we see all of that, and like we're kind of approaching this inevitable tragedy. So I kind of understand why people might have been like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
What's more, like, this film premiered at Cannes. According to Lynch, it was booed. It was not a successful film. It was largely critically panned. This had been planned originally as having 2 more films in this series, and of course those were completely canned because this film just did not do well. But yeah, it's a film that has been reappraised since then and has been talked about by a lot of filmmakers and a lot of viewers as being one of Lynch's greatest works. Something that like is truly different and unique. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, this is one of his more straightforward films, more so even than Mulholland Drive, which is several years later, 10 years later.
Mm-hmm.
So in true Lynchian manner, though, we don't actually start with Laura Palmer.
We do not.
We start in Deer Meadow with a prologue, and in which this involves the discovery of prostitute Teresa Banks, and she's a prostitute / waitress, and Gordon Cole, played by David Lynch himself, who's one of the I love that character so much.
He's so fun.
It is nice that this film, for all of its darkness, does kind of open with this sort of not hilarious, but like humorous elements, which is quite nice to kind of ease you into the heavier shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so this involves the investigation into the death of Teresa Banks, including Agent Desmond, right, who played by Chris Isaac, who's sort of a Dale Cooper stand-in.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things, I think, if you've seen Twin Peaks, is that the whole thing that happens in Deer Meadow seems like an inverse of Twin Peaks, right? It's these very unpleasant, unlikable characters who are like getting in the way of the FBI completely, getting in the way of the investigation of the murder. And it's not entirely clear why exactly. And so you have this sort of flip side to what we know happens in Twin Peaks, where everyone is a lot more welcoming and a lot more forgiving of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your thoughts about this whole opening sequence?
I think it's interesting because, yeah, it's really more about introducing us to what's happening with the FBI and not about Teresa Banks or her murder. And it's also partly since this all is a prequel, it partly is giving us an introduction to sort of what's happening with Agent Cooper before he shows up in Twin Peaks, and his life takes a turn, too, as he's investigating Laura's murder. So I don't know. I like it. I really enjoy David Lynch in these scenes. I think he's so funny and just goofy in such a good way.
Yes, I agree. He's fun. David Bowie shows up as Agent Jeffries, he has like vanished for years and suddenly reappeared. It sets up all of that kind of weird stuff that is going on. And also we know it eases us into also some of the things, like you said, that were happening with Cooper before Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
And
I also like, oh, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just gonna say, I also like, I mean, we call it a prologue, but it's like half an hour long. It's almost an entire Twin Peaks episode length itself. So you really get some time with them.
If you haven't seen this film, it feels like that this is going to be the main story.
Yeah.
Because it ends with Agent Desmond finding a ring and vanishing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Finding Teresa's ring and disappearing. And so you feel like, okay, so what's and then nothing happens with that afterwards. Like there is no further the ring keeps on coming back, but Desmond, all of those other things really just don't get involved, except for a couple of insert scenes involving Cooper and Cole, and sort of building up to the arrival of Cooper in Twin Peaks, which we know is what's going to happen. So by the end of the film, we're at the point where Laura Palmer's body is going to be discovered.
Yeah.
It's this like quirky beginning, and you feel like this is what the story is going to be, and there's just like, no, actually we're going to go to Laura Palmer now.
Mm-hmm.
So we do move to Twin Peaks 1 year later, and Laura Palmer is the homecoming queen, and she's got 2 boyfriends, and she's got her best friend Donna and everything. And of course, we know who Laura is. We know what is going to happen to her. We know what has been happening to her. But a lot of the film is her discovering what has been happening to her and her response to that.
Yes. There's a couple of things that I forgot I wanted to mention. One, the phrase "fire walk with me" actually turned up in the series.
Really?
Yes, it did. I forgot that had happened too. And they find, I'm trying now. I just watched it a couple of days ago, and now I'm trying to remember how it worked out.
This is the way it always is with Lynch. Anything like you watch it and then just like, I don't remember what the fuck happened.
It's so true, because I was like watching episodes, and then I watched the movie, and then I watched another episode. So now everything, I should not have done that. That was stupid. Everything's blending together. But I do specifically remember that the phrase did turn up during the investigation within the show, and it caught me by surprise when that happened. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention, this is not really anything significant, this is just an interesting thing. They actually recast the character of Donna. Laura Flynn Boyle played her in the show, and here she's played by Maura Kelly.
There's a bunch of recasting. Like I know that that Kyle MacLachlan's role was significantly downsized because of like, it seems to be a combination of scheduling conflict and also MacLachlan not wanting to be typecast. And then maybe some like interpersonal conflict going on between him and Lynch. So you had that. Laura Flynn Boyle. And there's some question about why Laura Flynn Boyle didn't choose to be involved. And everything from scheduling conflict to she didn't like the way the female characters were being treated. And that's unsubstantiated, but that's like part of the story. But actually, since that's one of the things I was like, that's interesting that was like one of the reasons that's been ascribed to her not appearing. So let's talk about the way the female characters are treated, because this is a film, and a lot of Lynch's films, as we've discussed, deal with this directly, but this is a film about violence against women. And about sexual exploitation and abuse, and in this case, incest. So like, is this feminist? Is this misogynist? Like, how do we understand what Lynch is doing with, particularly with Laura Palmer, but really with all of the female characters? Because you've got a lot of women throughout this film in particular that are being victimized in some ways and also kind of trying to have control over their victimhood in others.
I think if we look at feminism as simply, trying to give women an equal place in the world where we talk about women's issues the same way we talk about men's issues, I think under that description, I guess, I would say that this leans more feminist than misogynist, because I think one of the very insidious things about sexual abuse and about incest is what that does psychologically to victims, not just girls, boys are victims too, but what that does to victims. And I remember watching an Oprah Winfrey episode back in the 90s and being so shocked because it was all these girls that had been victims of abuse who then became very promiscuous, and some of them went into sex work and things. And I remember being so surprised by that. But then as I started to learn more about what really happens psychologically to those victims, it started to make more sense. And I think this showing Laura's experiences and how she reacts to what she has endured at the hands of her father, I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think in that way, it leans more feminist, just because of the fact that it's allowing us to actually understand the reality of what this does to somebody. And it's not about, it doesn't shame her. I don't feel like for sleeping around and for becoming a prostitute or any of that. It doesn't shame her, and that's not ultimately why she is, well, maybe kind of. I was going to say that's not ultimately why she is murdered. There's so much more to it than that. There's not this sense of she needs to be punished for her behavior.
Yeah, I think that that's really important, that there is not a punishment being meted out there. And Lynch, by and large, does not create this, like, he creates a world that has good and evil in it, but he doesn't create a moral universe, if that makes sense. So she's not being punished. The other thing that I noticed is that this film has a lot of, like, it's got nudity, it's got sex, etc., but all of it seems to me it's not about titillation. And we've talked before about films where rape scenes or abuse scenes are very much like, in the cinematic sense of the male gaze, of being like that this is something that the audience is in some way vicariously expected or intended to enjoy, right? That, he's bad, but we kind of like what's happening. That does not exist in this film at any level, like either with the scenes of nudity or with the, like, actual sexual violence, the direct sexual violence. So we've got, you get rape scenes, you get, like, women being brutalized. This is not fun. This is not this is not for your entertainment. This is something that is treated with horror and is very much, again, focalized through the women, and particularly through Laura Palmer. And that is something that I think, like, is incredibly important. And Lynch manages it while also complicating our feelings about Laura, and like we said earlier, about not making her into this perfect victim who is just victimized, but who actually attempts, in a certain sense, to take control of her life and to take control of her sexuality, but in a way that is basically just feeding into her own exploitation. And her own awareness of her exploitation. That's the other thing. She's very aware of what is happening to her and what has been done to her. And that particularly increases as the film goes on, when she discovers the real identity of Bob.
She knows that this has been happening to her since she was 12, but she doesn't really fully understand the magnitude of it, because she sees a like she doesn't see it as her father. She sees
Yeah.
this Bob. Yeah.
So let's talk about the Bob figure, because he's one of those elements that runs. He's in Twin Peaks and then he's in Fire Walk with Me, and he's one of those elements that kind of raises hackles a little bit because, like I said earlier, it seems almost like his presence is letting Leland Palmer off the hook to a certain degree. And I think one of the things that Fire Walk with Me does is actually kind of puts Leland Palmer back on the hook.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that.
It corrects something that, and it's very nebulous, I think, in Twin Peaks, but in Fire Walk with Me, it's like, no, this is him, so it isn't this, there is the sense of like, who is Bob? Is Bob like this demon, this external figure that is victimizing Lara? Like, how does all of this actually work? And I think that there are a number of points throughout the film where Lynch very strongly says Leland Palmer is horrified by what he's doing, but he also knows what he's doing. And he also does it. And
Right.
It doesn't say he is a victim too. It's like, no, he is this monster. He is Bob.
I have often wondered if the way that he is treated in the second season of the show was studio interference. If that was them saying like, no, audiences don't want to just accept that this guy is this bad and that he is, willfully making these choices. I think, I mean, this started off as a Sunday night television show. By the end, it was on like Thursdays or something. But it just, I think that I wonder, and it's probably something we'll never know for sure, but I feel like that was not a Lynch decision. I feel like that was people above him saying, no, we like the world's not ready for that.
Well, and the complicated nature of it is that Ray Wise in particular gives such a great performance as Leland Palmer, because he is really likable, and he is like, you do feel for him to a certain degree.
He does such a great job in the first season of being the grieving father, and he like beats the crap out of somebody who gets because because people think, oh, this guy did it, and he just goes off, and so you really believe that he is just grieving his daughter and wants revenge on whoever did this. And when you find out that he's the one that did it, you still don't want to believe that. And so you want to find an excuse for him. You want to have there be some other explanation.
Yeah. Well, and so I will say, when I first saw the show, I just knew vaguely what the show was, right? And so I kind of got into it, and I just really enjoyed the aesthetic mostly. And by the time you actually get to the revelation that it was Leland Palmer, and before that, it's very heavily hinted. Like as it leads up to that revelation, like, yeah, I think I know where this is going. But I remember doing that and just being like, no, I like him. Like, it is that sensation of like, you want it to be someone that you don't like. Yeah. Honestly, you want it to be someone who just seems monstrous. And I do think a lot of that comes down to Ray Wise's performance, but also there's such a complication within Leland Palmer that because he is horrified, and he is the culprit. He is the rapist. He is this father. He's been raping his daughter since she was 12. Like, that's what the story establishes. And we have to deal, as the audience, we have to deal with that dichotomy. And to note that this is not an external creature that is inhabiting him. And that he is both, basically. He is both that father and this monster. And that monstrosity is very human, is very real, right? It isn't something that is coming onto him from the outside. And it's a very complicated and difficult thing to process, I think.
And I think that's... Oh, sorry.
No, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think that is what makes David Lynch one of the most interesting filmmakers of the last 40 years, is the fact that he is really willing, and I would even say more interested in the complications and the juxtapositions of people, and just the fact that we're, as I said before, we're all complicated. I think that's what he's most interested in.
Yeah, yeah, and that human good and evil is more complicated than good and evil, really, and that
Mm-hmm.
it's within the entire, like, it's that ugliness that is underneath the small town facade, but it isn't, again, talking about those issues of barriers and boundaries, right? And he blurs all of them continuously.
Yeah.
What is between, so you get these images of like the Palmer household, which is just, it's this perfect, picture perfect suburban upper middle class, the daughter is the homecoming queen, like everything is, you have the nice little family dinner, but it's horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
It's this, Laura's room is this pink and frilly, and you've got images of like angels on the wall and things like that, and all of these horrific things are happening at the same time, and it's that juxtaposition and that blurring of what's happening that I think is the most poignant and fascinating and horrifying part of it.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't remember ever noticing it before, but when I was watching this week, I there's a scene, it's pretty early on after we switch over to Laura. She's walking down a neighborhood street. She goes to Donna's house. They're walking together, probably to school. And I was looking at just the setting and this neighborhood that they're walking through, and it looked exactly like Haddonfield in Halloween. And the way that it's photographed, it reminded me exactly of Jamie Lee Curtis and her friend, walking when she first sees Michael Myers. And I just thought that doesn't feel accidental.
No, very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a long, we've talked about this a little bit. There's a long history in American filmmaking of the sort of small town with a secret kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of the gloss of suburbia that is hiding at some level these darknesses that are underneath it, and that in fact in some ways influences the darknesses because of this desperation to maintain the gloss and the perfection.
Yeah.
And again with Lynch, even more so than something like Halloween, where you do have this horror that is kind of born there and then comes back, right? But there is still
Right.
this delineation between the two. Whereas with Lynch, it's much more like this is all muddled together. This is all mixed up.
Mm-hmm.
Those darknesses and that evil is embedded in this world. And he emphasizes as well that in the use of dialogue and in the sort of cryptic nature of a lot of his films, he emphasizes, it's funny, he emphasizes the boundaries while blurring them at the same time. He
Yeah.
emphasizes the wrongness.
Yes. Yeah.
One of the other things that I thought was really interesting in this rewatching this is the degree to which Lara continues to be defined, or other people, particularly men, continue to define Lara. And at the level of the viewer who's been privy much more to her subjective experience, we understand her a lot better, and we realize like some of the things that James says to her, some of the things that Bobby says to her, like the way that her Jacques, her pimp, treats her, etc. And they all have this very specific view of who Lara is and what she is and their relationship to her. And what we're sort of forced to understand and to be in Lara's position of like, you don't know, basically, you don't understand what is truly going on. They're attempting to define her, and she is basically escaping at some level definition because of all of these other horrors that have been a part of her life.
And I think that's a big reason why I'm glad that this prequel exists and that so much of it is through her eyes, because it's this sort of giving her justice. Nothing's going to bring Laura back to life. And she's dead, she's gone. But getting to actually understand her story and her own experiences through her eyes is so important. Like we these other men don't get to define her for us anymore.
Yeah, and throughout the series, they're like, we get the sense that she has been many different things to many different people, but that's the thing.
Yeah.
She's always been this image,
Mm-hmm.
this thing upon which they're projecting themselves, and that's a critique in itself. right? But the film definitely like it puts us in her position throughout like almost the entirety of the Laura Palmer section of the film. We are with her. We are experiencing what she is experiencing. We're seeing the world subjectively through her eyes, and the horror of that, and the inevitable. And I don't think that it's not fate, but there does seem to be this sense of inevitability. She has been doomed by the narrative, in the sense that we know what happens next. The viewer knows what's going to happen to her. Right. And at a certain point in the film, you feel like she knows. She knows that maybe not precisely, but she knows where this is going. And that is a point of horror and despair as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's on a path that no matter what's going to happen, even if it doesn't end with her father killing her, it's not going to lead to anything good. And there's such a tragedy in that, but there's also, I think it makes the ending of the movie, I don't know, like there's a bittersweetness to it.
It's tragic, and it's also going to, I think, because it precedes Twin Peaks, it's also going to reveal something. And it's going to reveal, and it is going to bring a certain kind of justice. Yeah. Not for Laura, really, but for the wider world at some level, that it's going to crack open some of these facades, and for the viewer as well. Like, it's going to force us to look at the world around us a little bit more, at the same time as being this horrible thing. So let's talk about the guardian angel. Because there's this angel figure who appears in one of the drawings that's on Laura's wall, and then at one point disappears. And it's the sense that she's been abandoned at some level. But nearing the end of the film, the guardian angel reappears and does not save her, but does give us hope, I guess. What's your interpretation of that?
I feel like because of the fact that there was no way to save Laura, her death was unfortunately inevitable. I think that angel, basically welcoming her to the other side, there's this peace and hope in whatever comes next, and I think that there's a lot of beauty in that scene of, we know Laura's dead, we know that's not changing, but at least we know that she gets to live on in a way, and in a much safer way. And yeah, it's sort of the sweet release of death after everything that she's been through. And I don't know, I think it's really beautiful. She's crying as she sees this angel, but she's crying tears of joy.
Yeah, and throughout the film, she cries a lot throughout the film. And it is almost these moments. Actually, a lot of people cry throughout the film, but it is these moments of horror, of screaming, of terror. And it is that the ending is one of the few times where, like you're saying, it's actually release at some level. It's actually like there's nothing for you to be afraid of anymore, basically.
Nothing else is going to hurt you.
Yeah. And that it's it is tragic. It is tragic for her, because it is the only way that she can escape all of this. And I mean, it's a downer at that level. Like, the only way that this girl can escape this is through death, violent death too, at the hands of someone who is supposed to protect her and love her.
Right.
And instead, like, hurt her consistently. And and then we know what happens. And we know the rest of the story, and that there is going to be some kind of justice.
I don't know what else to say.
It's I have to say, it's a rough film. I had not seen it in a while. The first time I saw it, I didn't like it particularly, because I think it's so rough. It's not a movie that I want to watch over and over again. We were talking last week about Mulholland Drive. Mulholland Drive is one that I just want to sit around and pick apart, right? This one, I'm like, I can't do this. And there really is very little respite, particularly when you get into the Laura Palmer sections. There isn't that, moment of like, okay, we can breathe for a minute.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's it's beautifully shot. It's brilliantly acted. Cheryl Lee is fantastic. And she carries the film on her back, her and Ray Wise pretty much.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things that's like you have to experience it, and it's so brilliant. And at the same time, like I don't want to watch this film again. I'm going to wait another 5 years before I rewatch this film.
Yeah. Oh, I wanted to just kind of mention too, just going back to did the story let Leland off the hook too much? And in the movie, that's very clear. And I think one of the ways that becomes exceptionally clear is in the end, when we do see the murder about to happen, and Leland has the pages that were torn out of her diary, and he says, what's the line? I think it's, I always thought you knew it was me, or something like that. Like, it's very clear that it was him all along, and that he knew it, and he thought she did too. And for us, it's very much like there's no question, there's no mistaking this.
He doesn't let himself off the hook, and I think that that's very important. Like he doesn't, at some level, like he does not try to explain himself. The Lynch doesn't give the character that right, basically. To try to explain why, I didn't know or anything. Like, no, you knew this entire time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a rough movie, I have to say.
It is. And I think that's why that image of the angel at the end with Laura, there's sort of a piece to it. It's like, she's been through so much. We have been through so much watching her go through it. And it's sort of this respite for all of us.
Yep. And then it ends, and it ends with her body being
discovered.
And
for 25 years that was the end. Until 2017, when the new season came. But
yes, and then Twin Peaks: The Return happens. And we get to kind of find out what happens to Cooper, and like all sorts of other things as well, which, by the way, if anyone has not seen Twin Peaks: The Return, like, watch it. It is an experience. I honestly,
it really is.
I really think that the total Twin Peaks saga, so the 2 seasons of the television show Fire Walk with Me, and Twin Peaks: The Return, really is like Lynch's masterwork in terms of what he, with Mark Frost as well, but what is accomplished in all of that. And it's rambling and strange, and like I remember watching Twin Peaks: The Return just being like, this is amazing, I have no idea what's going on. Which is a constant experience.
Right, but somehow by the end it does feel like it coalesces into something.
It does. No, it does. It all connects.
Yeah, it does. It all fits together by the end. It's a long journey and a winding journey to get there, but the payoff is so good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's a single piece. That's the thing. And so you're watching it episodically, but it is still a single piece of art. That's what, like, and you have to look at the whole thing to really comprehend what has been happening. While you're experiencing it, it's like, what?
Right.
Just like, I don't know what that was, but okay.
And I'm so glad he got that opportunity to come back with this, all those years later, and also using the passage of time as an important part of the return, and it's not just, it doesn't just feel like, oh, we're just gonna just do this because of nostalgia. It feels like it's actually, it really truly does feel like it's part of the story.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So any final thoughts on Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me?
Join me in just revisiting the entire saga. And yeah, I think I wish that I had gotten to finish the second season before I watched this, because I feel like watching it in the order that it all came out is the right way to do it. But that's okay. Definitely watch it. It's so weird because um the show is on Paramount Plus / Showtime, but the movie is on Max right now, and I can't remember where else. I think rentals too, but
Also Criterion.
it's oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not on Showtime.
Where's the return available? Is the return on Showtime?
The return is on Showtime, yeah.
Okay, good. So you can watch the full series on Showtime.
Yes.
And then you have to, yeah, I don't understand. We've been doing like Lynch this entire month, and like finding where his films are is a real fucking trip sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Next week we're gonna have to talk about that.
Yes. So for next week we are going to be talking about The Elephant Man, which is not easy to find. It is available. You can watch it. You just gotta look for it a little bit. So next week we're going to be talking about The Elephant Man, which was one of his like he was nominated for a Academy Award for it, I believe.
Several.
And I've never seen it, so this will be fun.
Oh, you haven't? Oh, okay. I'm excited. Yeah.
I've seen pieces of it. It was one of those films that showed up on like network television quite a lot for some reason. And so I think I've seen like sections in the middle, but I've never actually seen the entire film.
Okay. All right.
So that will be us next week. And of course, we want to always thank our wonderful and lovely patrons, who include Abby, Audra, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Ferdinand, Heather, Holly, James, Judy, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Noel, Robert, Steve, and Sharon. And thank you so much, guys, for supporting us. We will have some bonus episodes, which should be coming you this week. Yes. So I'm really excited about that, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of fun with some Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And if you want to join their number, we are on patreon.com/citizendame. And you also get fun stuff as a result. So you get bonus episodes and little buttons and stickers and fun things. You can also throw us a couple of dollars at our Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame. And of course, we have our website, that's citizendamepod.com. And you can get in touch with us via socials and email. Our email is citizendamepod@gmail.com. And we are on Instagram and Blue Sky at citizendamepod, and a Letterboxd HQ at citizendame. And you can also get in touch with us individually. Karen, where are you?
I am on Instagram, Letterboxd, and Blue Sky at Karen M. Peterson.
And I'm on Instagram and Letterboxd at LH Business. And that will close us out for this week. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye.
Do you think that if you were falling in space, that you would slow down after a while or go faster and faster? Faster and faster. And for a long time you wouldn't feel anything. And then you'd burst into fire. Forever. And the angels wouldn't help you. Because they've all gone away.